Well, hello again, brothers and sisters. Um, I hope you benefited and were able to get something from the last or the first, my first effort at trying to do this. I appreciate your feedback and your comments. I'm still learning. I'm trying to find out a way to get some more clarity with this. The more clarity you bring, of course, the more space a file takes up. So I'm facing some challenges with the size of the file. My apologies. I know that first sermon, I wasn't paying attention to the time, and it went over a little over 50 minutes, which is far too long to begin with. So I have my stopwatch. It's right here. And I think the best way for me to do this for now, which you'll be happy to hear, is to keep this to a maximum of about 25 to 30 minutes. So I'm working on a few other ways to present this. I'm looking at possibly a website that we could make a church as our church's website and provide a way for us to do this for now. And then when we get back together, I can provide some audio recordings as well. So anyway, this, as I've shared before, this will count, or this will be part of what I'll offer for Wednesday night. Right now, I'm just going to do some different topics from week to week for the Wednesday evening. We have been spending a lot of time on Wednesday evening about principles of moral and spiritual growth. I'm gonna, I may touch on some of that, but I have a couple more topics and stuff I thought might be helpful for us to consider. So I'll be try to be as aware as I can of as the time and see how we can go forward with this. So I've made this. I hope this a little bit more easy to see. Tried to make the a little bit more larger. Again, trying to do the best I can to enable you to see at least a little bit of an outline in what we're trying to accomplish here. So uh, I'm titling this or calling this basically the topic I just want to invite us to consider is this idea that the world is not the way it's supposed to be. And I'm sharing this because, in light of, again, uh, the circumstances that we find ourselves in and the events that have been unfolding and all the different challenges that we're facing, certainly where people's health is concerned with the virus, and then, of course, all the tremendous, significant economic and social uh, stresses and challenges that we're all facing. Um, so I want to kind of use this. This occasions like this become occasions for all different kinds of people from all different points of view, from the very religious to the very irreligious, meaning an atheist, for example, for people to try to interpret, to make sense of what is happening here with this pandemic. How do we come to terms with it? How do we understand it? Things of that nature. So uh, I want to kind of use that as a leverage point, if you will, or an occasion to, if I was to think about something that I think is an interesting perspective on the problem of evil, the problem of suffering and injustice in the world. And I think it's been a very helpful way for me to think about it on a personal level. And also, I think it can be a very helpful way for us to find a way to possibly have a door, have an opening to, for hopefully a reasonable conversation about what is such a very vital and important topic. Um, so let's begin here with number one. First of all, so let's begin with this idea. There's very few things in the world that everybody will find an agreement on. But there is a few things that people, almost no matter who they are, no matter what their culture, no matter what their time in history, will agree with. And that is the idea that there is something wrong with the world. Whether if you're an atheist, in fact, some of the most vocal atheists and the most vocal and strongest arguments that people will make against belief in God is precisely on this point. That is, the world is terribly has gone terribly is terribly wrong. There's all kinds of horrible things that happen in the world, and the fact that there is clearly horrible things that happen in the world that proves that there cannot be a God. So even an atheist who doesn't even affirm God's reality is among some of the most vocal people that you'll ever meet, who will say the world is filled with horrible, horrible injustices in the world. They just happen to believe that those injustices prove that there can't be a God. But there's almost no one who does not dispute the fact that something is wrong with the world. That is, that universal human experience says that things are not the way, as I put in the title here, things are not the way they're supposed to be. And I want to get you to be thinking about that concept. Everybody recognizes that things are not the way they're supposed to be. They're not the way they're supposed to be. And that's the key thing that I want us to be reflecting upon, because as believers, we agree with that, and unbelievers and almost anybody, no matter who they are, is going to tell you and how awful things are. I mean, one of the most universal things human beings or masters are is getting together and complaining about what's wrong with everything. I mean, every day when I'm at work, there's one way or another we're going to be griping or complaining or about someone or something. All right, in our job, in our families, in the world at large, in politics, whatever it is, we're always complaining about how things are and how things could or should be better. So that brings us to the second observation, and that is that while everyone agrees something is wrong with the world, very few people are in agreement upon what exactly is it that is wrong with the world, right? So everybody agrees there's things that are wrong with the world, but precisely defining what is it that is wrong with the world and what's the reason for it and what's the cause of it is something that people have vast different ideas upon, okay? There are some people, the philosophy of Karl Marx, the philosophy of communism as espoused by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, proposes the idea that what is wrong with the world is ultimately everything has to do with economic matters, okay? So every single part of our life, what is wrong with it boils down to economics. That the powerful and the rich exploit the less powerful, and the poor or the disadvantaged or those that are managers exploit the workers. They see that as a universal problem. There are all different other schools of thought. So there's all different ways that people will tell you why the world is not the way it's supposed to be and how it could be corrected and how it could be made better. So that brings us to the third observation here, and that is that an increasing number of people are persuaded that the reality of suffering, injustice, and other things proves that a good God does not exist. So this goes back to the point I made by way of introduction, that while atheists will agree that something is terribly wrong with the world, they are going to contend that there is bad in the world, that there are horrible things in the world, that there are terrible injustices in the world, that there is war and crime and poverty and all the other things that are horrible things in the world. This proves that a good God does not exist. So what I want to challenge you to think about today is that can sound like a very formidable objection. It can sound like an objection that we don't quite know how to answer. How do we address this question and this concept? And it's really important to know that more and more people in our more and more what I've referred to as secular, our world is secular, and that it either denies or ignores the reality of God. That's secularism. And our culture is absolutely, unquestionably, predominantly a secular culture. American culture is secular. And secular cultures are either cultures that they deny there is a God, or they're cultures that will say, yeah, there may or may not be a God. And even if there is a God, he really doesn't have anything to do with us. So God really is there, but he's irrelevant. So in this increasingly secular culture that we live in, This kind of argument here, number three, it has gained a lot more traction with many, many more people. They are persuaded that the existence of horrible things in the world proves that there can't be a God. I remember when I was working over at Sharp Depot that there was a young lady who worked there, and she was having a conversation with Greg, who was a guy that we worked side by side every day, and he was a believer. And he came up to me and said, I just had this conversation with her, and she began to explain to me how she went to church as a girl and her family was religious and all these other things. And then she said that as she got a little bit older, when she was in high school, she was doing some kind of a report, and she did a report on poverty, a report on starvation, and she saw all these horrific images of children and dying because of starvation. And she said, in so many words, that when I saw those kinds of things, I just told myself there's no way that I could believe there is a good and loving God when He would allow those kinds of things to happen. So she said that is the reason why she no longer has confidence that God exists. So it's important to know that that is a main way that people try to refute belief in God and defend their disbelief in God. Now, here is the way that I think is very interesting to approach that challenge. And it's here with number 4. And I say here that the interesting thing is that the reality of evil in the world actually establishes that God, and I put here, who is the ultimate source of goodness, exists. So here is the main and possibly strange thing that I'd like you to be thinking about today. The reality of evil in the world establishes that God exists. The atheist, the skeptic, the unbeliever, the secularist, if you will, they believe that evil disproves the reality of God. And I want to contend that it is just the opposite. The presence of evil, the presence of things being not the way they're supposed to be. Okay? So again, up here at the top, not the way it's supposed to be. That reality that every human being recognizes is true actually establishes that God really does exist. Now, you may be asking, and others may be asking, well, how can that possibly be? So here's the way that I would try to illustrate this idea, and I invite us to be thinking about what it means. So here's the observation here on point number 5. And that is that we can't judge something as wrong or unfair or unjust or whatever terms you want to use to say that that's not the way it's supposed to be. We cannot judge anything as being wrong or unfair unless we are appealing to an already existing objective standard by which we make that judgment. So let me give some simple, practical, real world, simple little ways that this is shown, and let's try to move into how this applies to the question at hand that we're looking at. So how do I judge whether or not a string, how do I judge the length of a piece of string? Now, you could look at the string and say, well, it's 12 inches long. You could look at the string and say it's 13 inches long. Another person says looks like it's 11 and a half inches long. How are you to be able to determine that which one is right and which one is wrong? So 3 people give 3 different answers. It could be that all 3 of them are wrong. But each one of them is trying to make an appeal to what actually is the case. How do we make that determination? Well, we get a ruler out, right? We get a standard here. We have a standard that we use. We take the standard by which we measure something, right? And we find out exactly what the length of the string is. So we are able to determine what is the case, only because we have a standard that shows us that something is the case. So let's move on beyond that. How do you determine that a line is crooked as opposed to a line being straight? The only way that you can say that a line is crooked is because you already know what a straight line is and what a straight line looks like. Now think about that just for a moment. If you say that line is not straight, that line is crooked, how do you know that? You're only able to make that judgment because you already know what a straight line is and what it looks like. So every time we make these judgments about something not being as it's supposed to be, that something is wrong, we're already working from a standard by which we're making that assessment. So let's move on. Let's suppose that someone gets in their car, turns the key, and the engine starts up, and all of a sudden black smoke starts to come out from underneath the hood. Now, when something like that happens, a person who even has no understanding of how a car works at all, nothing, just knows that you put the key in and it starts, and then you press the gas pedal and then suddenly it starts to go. A person who has no understanding about a car would nevertheless be able to determine that if you turn on the car and black smoke starts to come out of from underneath the hood from the engine, that they would be able to determine what? Something is wrong. My question is, how do they know that something is wrong? Now, they know that something is wrong because they already know that when a car engine is functioning as it's supposed to be, when the car engine is functioning as it's supposed to be, black smoke does not come out. Black smoke is a sign that what? Right here. Black smoke is a sign something is wrong. But the only way that you could make that judgment that something is wrong is that you already know how it's supposed to be. You're already assuming, you're already working from what already established knowledge that you know how it's supposed to be. So let me take this from those kinds of examples into the real world, the world of suffering and hardship and difficulty. One of the most famous rock bands of the 70s and 80s was the band Journey. In fact, they hail from San Francisco. And Journey had a number of huge hit songs. But to make a long story short, they had a song, and I saw a documentary about them. And in this song, the band had gone to visit a young boy in a hospital. He was dying from cancer. He was horribly sick and ill. But it was one of these make-a-wish kind of ideas, and he wanted to see the band, and they had a chance to meet him, gave him autographs, all the other things. And when eventually the young boy died, and this song on one of their albums was basically in memory to him and dedicated to him. Now, they interviewed one of the members of the band. His name is Jonathan Cain. And I remember watching the interview. Now, Jonathan Cain, I do not believe at that time was a Christian believer at all. Jonathan Cain now can be described, I think, in the broad term as being a Christian believer. But anyway, at that time, he said very, very passionately, with a great deal of sorrow and tears, when he talked about this young boy suffering and dying, he said, "It's just not right what happened to him. It's just not right." I believe that atheists and completely irreligious people can look at that and make the same judgment and feel passionately and strongly that's not right. What they're saying is that's not the way it's what it's supposed to be. We know that young children shouldn't be dying from cancer. But young children are. And the reason why we know that they shouldn't be dying from cancer is because we already know what? That that's not the way it's supposed to be. That children die from cancer indicates that that was not what God purposed, planned, or intended. That's why we can identify it as not the way it's supposed to be. Something has gone wrong. And we are all capable of making these judgments because we all have within our hearts, within our minds, within our souls, a fundamental moral awareness that tells us that the world was not designed to be a place where, for example, again, young children end up dying from cancer. I'm checking my stopwatch, just so you know. So I'm sharing all those to make that observation that the only way someone can judge that something is not the way it's supposed to be is because they already know how it's supposed to be. We already know how it's supposed to be. So that's point number 6 here. That we see the world is not the way it's supposed to be, which everyone does, assumes we already know how it's supposed to be. How do you know that there's not supposed to be black smoke coming out of a car engine? Because you already know how it's supposed to be. You could never identify something's wrong with the black smoke unless you know what's right to begin with. Okay? Knowledge of the wrong assumes you already know the right. Okay? I've been told, I don't know if this is true, but some time ago when counterfeit money was made, that when FBI agents and people that were involved with tracking down counterfeit money, that they were not trained to look so much at counterfeit money and identify counterfeit money. They were trained to identify what? They were trained to identify what actual U.S. currency does look like. What are the clear things, the watermarks and all the other things that are on? That's what you use. And by means of knowing that, you are able to judge what? Oh, that's counterfeit. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And when we look at the world in its present state, when we look at the anxieties and the fears and all the things that are happening right now, we're all making a judgment that this is not a good thing. It's not good that people are dying. It's not good, the prospects of many, many more people possibly dying. It's not good that our economy could face horrible, horrible setbacks and disrupt millions and millions and millions of people's lives. Everybody across the board agrees this is not a good thing in and of itself. There are very, very horrible things that are beginning to unfold before us. And all of this assumes that we're all recognizing, guess what? That the world is not as it's supposed to be. And that's a very, very profound insight. So let me conclude or come to this way of looking at this idea and just rehearsing some fundamental truths which describes a biblical vision of this concept, which the Bible supports the same thought. If there's any book in the Bible, if there's any book in the world that says the world is not the way it's supposed to be, it's the Bible. What the Bible does is it tells us why the world is not the way it's supposed to be. And it also tells us what God is doing to change that reality and that situation. So we begin with the biblical understanding. First of all of creation is created good. Genesis chapter 1 is the beginning of everything. It's the most foundational thing. You will never understand anything beyond in the entirety of the Bible unless you understand and grasp Genesis chapter 1. And the one thing that stands out above everything else in reading Genesis chapter 1 is that the totality of God's creation is good. It is good. Every day, except I think it's the first day, God declares that what he makes is good. And when he completes and his creation, with the creation of man and woman, it says that God beheld everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. God is deliberately, so emphatically stating to us as he rehearses the creation story that every time that I fashioned and formed this world to be a habitat for human beings, everything that I set in place, all the order, all the design, everything that I situated throughout the universe to make the universe as it is all good. It is all, let's say it this way, it's all the way it's supposed to be. Okay? That's how the story begins. And we don't get anything else unless we get that foundational point. This is the way it's supposed to be. It's good. So that brings us to letter B, and that is through angelic, the angels, before Adam and Eve's fall. There was a rebellion among angels, some angels. So, but through an angelic and through human rebellion, the world, the universe, the seen and the unseen realms of reality, the world is not as it once was. It has not, it has, I put, awkward way to put it here, I realize now, I put it has not good in it. So it's all good in the beginning, and now there's a not good in it. So think of something, let's take the car engine for example. So the car engine has a design and a purpose and a function. And so instead of me putting motor oil inside the engine, which lubricates all the moving parts and keeps everything running, instead of motor oil, I put in soda pop. Now, when I put soda pop, I'm putting something in there that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not what it's designed, it's not what it's made for. And if I put the soda in the engine and start up the engine, I'm going to ruin the engine. It will not function the way it's supposed to be. And if I start to drive it and I don't know what somebody's done, I'm going to very quickly realize something is wrong with this engine. Then I may pull up the hood, do inspection, drain out the oil pan and realize there's not oil, there's soda inside the car. I know it's a silly illustration, but it serves the point. It suddenly, the engine as the engine was perfectly good and well functioning, but something came in that distorted it and mixed it up. And now it's not good. The engine doesn't run. It's been ruined possibly. This is what has happened in the creation. Not through God's will, but through angelic and human wills. The third point is that God, who is the source of all goodness, the standard by which all goodness is measured, right? He has set in motion a plan to save the world through his son, Jesus Christ. So God sets in motion this plan. It comes to its almost ultimate fulfillment in the death, burial, and resurrection and ascension of Jesus, where Jesus overcomes sin and he overcomes death. Okay, so he overcomes all the crippling realities of human evil, and he overcomes all the debilitating realities of our present mortal, corruptible condition. He overcomes all of that. And so we are able now, in the midst of this not the way it's supposed to be world, we can finally recognize, letter D, in light of what God has done in Christ, that God will fulfill his purpose, and in the end, it will be, all of it will be good. All of it will be restored. All of it will be as it's supposed to be. All right. Well, I timed this almost perfectly. I wanted to keep it no more than 30 minutes, and I'm at 29 minutes right now. A much shorter class than for those of you who are with me on Wednesday night, and you're probably thinking, maybe we can just keep it this way from now on, and Tom won't blab on for 45 or 50 minutes. So anyway, I'm continuing to learn and figure out other ways to improve this or make it better. If you have any other suggestions, please let me know. I think I find it to be really important. You know how I am. I like to have something here for you to see, for you to look at, for you to follow along. I think that's important to do that. I don't think it's as important for you to see my mug in front of you, but nevertheless you get it. So I hope you find this helpful and beneficial. Um, I'm glad that some of you were able to take a look at the first one. I'm glad that you found it helpful. I'm glad that we can do this. In the meantime, I hope that this sheltering in place will come to an end soon. We'll be able to find a way to get back together again. So until then, grace and peace to you, and we'll see you. Hopefully, we'll see you, or you'll be seeing me. Hopefully, I'll have that video up for you by Sunday morning. God bless. Thank you.